Should the Rangers trade Carson Soucy this offseason? Yeah.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1312 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, Jon Chik. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, yeah, want to kick off today's episode by talking a little bit about Carson Soucy. He obviously came over to the Rangers around the trade deadline this past season in exchange for a third-round draft pick and mostly struggled as a member of the Rangers. We'll get into the details of that, but he was even a healthy scratch for a short period of time. I believe it was 3 consecutive games for Soucy. So we're going to talk about him and the possibility of the Rangers dealing him this offseason for a couple of different reasons, a couple of different benefits that the Rangers would have were they to trade Carson Soucy this offseason. So we'll get to that. Also going to get to the idea of K'Andre Miller potentially being a candidate for an offer sheet this offseason. We discussed Will Cooley in yesterday's episode. So if you missed that, you want my thoughts on Will Cooley, definitely go back and check out the episode right before this one. But today, going to be talking about K'Andre Miller potentially facing the same exact situation. And we'll kick off, or we'll wrap up this episode, I should say, with free agent spotlight. We're going to do this throughout the entire offseason, take a look at different Rangers who are unrestricted free agents or restricted free agents and talk about what the future might hold for them with the Rangers. So that's how we'll wrap up the episode. But for right now, let's go ahead and talk about Carson Soucy and the idea of potentially trading him this offseason. I say just rip off the Band-Aid. And the funny thing about this for me is that I thought I would be on the other side of this argument. When it first started being debated on social media, I mean, there might have been Ranger fans who very early in Soucy's tenure with the Rangers were pretty much ready for the team to move on and go in a different direction and give somebody else a chance. I mean, he really did struggle with the Rangers the limited time that he played with them this past season. But again, I thought, once this idea started marinating again here in the offseason, and we had an article from Vince Mercogliano where he talks about the possibility of trading Carson Soucy, I thought that I would be more in the camp of hanging on to Carson Soucy moving forward into this season. When the trade first went down, I'm not going to do revisionist history. I actually liked the trade for the Rangers. I didn't think it was like an amazing trade, but I could see what they were going for, and I was mostly on board with it. I liked the idea that it was a little bit of a buy low situation. My understanding is that, this past season for Soucy was pretty far and away his worst in the NHL of his career, and so maybe you can get him for a little bit less than you might otherwise be able to. A little bit of a change of scenery does him some good, and all of a sudden, you basically just stole Carson Soucy. But obviously, his play certainly left something to be desired after he got here to the Rangers last season. But I also like the fact that it only cost the Rangers a third rounder. We look back at this past trade deadline, and guys were flying off the boards, being traded from this team to that team. You've got like mediocre NHL players fetching second round picks, and we get Carson Soucy, somebody that's mostly been known as a solid defenseman for most of his career, for just a third rounder. I really like that. I like the fact that his contract only had a year and a half left on it, and the cap hit was only $3.25 million per season, so obviously very affordable. I like the fact that he was only signed through his age 31 season with the Rangers, so you're not going to be dealing with, somebody at the very tail end of his career. You had to like the size. Everybody wants this team to get bigger, tougher, physical, more nasty, all that stuff, right? 6'5", 208 pounds. You have to like that. The physicality, 576 hits in 365 career games. I like the fact that prior to this past season, Soucy had never been on the wrong side of a plus minus in his career. And even with this past year being, I believe it was a minus 11 for Soucy this past year between the Canucks and Rangers combined, still a plus 60 for his career. And I like the fact that, for the final year of his contract, Soucy only has a limited no move clause. I think it's like 10 teams that he can block a trade to. So if you had to move him, which maybe the Rangers do, you'd be able to do that more likely than not. Then, unfortunately, we all saw him play. And I don't want to be too mean here. I don't want to make it sound like Carson Soucy is like broken beyond all repair or he's at the very tail end of his career. He is still just 30 years old. And to be fair to Soucy as well, he did step into a borderline hopeless, borderline miserable situation with the Rangers this past season. I mean, you guys saw this team play hockey. You saw the way they interacted with each other. This was not a good season for the Rangers, and that's oversimplifying it to the nth degree, but we'll leave it there for now to keep the focus on Carson Soucy. And of course, you come over to a new team, you got to learn a new system, new coaching staff, new teammates, all that good stuff. So you could talk yourself into believing, even after what happened last season, that there would be better days ahead for Carson Soucy with the Rangers. But again, we all saw him play. We saw the lack of mobility. Anytime he had the puck, I would hold my breath. He's not really known as a puck-moving defenseman to begin with. But I made a joke on social media, except that it wasn't really that much of a joke, the way things were going for Soucy with the Rangers, that if he has the puck, there's a 75% chance that it's going to result in a pass to nobody. It just felt like he was very unsure of himself anytime that he had the puck. And, overall, I think it got to the point where most of us wanted him to have as small of a role as possible with the Rangers. When he first was traded for and the Rangers first brought him in, a lot of us, myself included, I'll freely admit it, were hoping that maybe Soucy is Adam Fox's new defense partner for the rest of this season and at least for next season until Soucy's contract runs out, and then you reassess once that happens. But, I mean, yeah, there's Adam Fox's defense partner. Obviously, he loses Ryan Lindgren at the trade deadline this past season. K'Andre Miller was with him for a while, but Fox has had kind of a revolving door of defense partners. I mean, it's mostly been Lindgren, but anytime it's not Lindgren for one reason or another, you've seen a bunch of different guys try to step into that role. And, Soucy, he might have had like a game or two with Fox here and there, or they were on the ice at the same time for this spot in the game or that spot in the game, but it obviously never really stuck. And again, watching Soucy play, just didn't seem to have a lot of confidence in his game, got caught flat-footed a little bit, struggled against the rush, as did every single New York Ranger defenseman this past season. And, just overall wasn't all that good. And it got to the point where, I mean, forget about putting him on the top pairing with Adam Fox. Let's keep him on the third pairing. Let's keep him glued there if he's even in the lineup, which a couple of times he was not. He was a healthy scratch, as I mentioned earlier. And let's just limit his minutes as much as possible, and let's make sure he's not out there in a big spot in the game. That's kind of where I got to with Soucy toward the end of this past season. And maybe that's a little bit harsh. And as I mentioned not too long ago, there could be brighter days ahead for Soucy with the Rangers if he is here after, this offseason comes and goes here. But, part of the reason why I think the Rangers should at least explore a trade for Soucy is you look at their salary cap situation. They have just north of $8 million, and they got a lot to do. I mean, you figure out, like, they got to hang on to K'Andre Miller if they keep him in the fold. Will Cooley needs a new contract. Even guys that you don't really think about are going to get small pay raises, guys like Matt Rempe, guys like Adam Edstrom, so on and so forth. I mean, that all takes a bite out of the salary cap. And if you wanted to increase your cap space, you could always go ahead and trade Chris Kreider. That's something that we've talked about in the past. But I do think that the hiring of Mike Sullivan makes it a little bit more likely that Kreider sticks around next season. I mean, I personally would still be in favor of trading Kreider, and not the smallest of reasons for doing that is the fact that, again, you need cap space very badly. And if the Rangers were to trade Chris Kreider, or they were to trade K'Andre Miller, maybe, all those things I think would at least increase the chances that Soucy sticks around. But you look at, how everything lines up right now. If you go on Puckpedia or whatever your favorite NHL salary cap website might be, you look around and it's like, where can we save money? If we need to open up some cap space here, where can we actually do it? I mentioned Kreider. I mean, that certainly is a possibility, and he does have $6.5 million in cap hit next season, and the season after that, for that matter. But where else can you save money? I mean, you see people throwing out the idea of trading Alexis Lafreniere. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sell low on somebody that was the former number one overall pick. I just don't think that would really make a lot of sense. I'm not going to trade Alexis Lafreniere to make room for Carson Soucy. I mean, forget about that. You look at like Panarin and Mika. I know people throw out their names every now and then. They both have full no move clauses and are under no obligation to waive them. Panarin, I wouldn't trade anyway. Panarin, I'm at least waiting until the trade deadline this upcoming season, and then you reassess. If the Rangers are contending, he stays. If the Rangers are falling out of the playoff race on the outside looking in, then you trade Panarin. But that's a different conversation for a different time. And Panarin's a free agent after next season anyway. So if you're looking into making a splash in next year's free agent class, you'll be able to do that, honestly, solely based on the fact that Panarin will be a free agent thing, because that frees up, $11.6 million or whatever his total cap hit is. But All this is to say, again, there's not an obvious player to move. There's no obvious salary to move where you can open up more cap space for the Rangers this year. And if the Rangers feel like they need more cap space to do the things that they need to do this offseason, then I think Soucy makes a lot of sense as being the odd man out and the guy that gets dealt before the start of free agency for sure. That's when you would want to do it by. The problem for as far as trading Soucy is concerned, though, is you're just not going to be able to get a whole lot for him because he didn't play well last season. He's coming off of what it was probably the worst season of his career. You combine what he did with the Canucks and what he did with the Rangers, that probably is the case. Again, when the Rangers traded for Soucy, it was for just a third rounder. Now, if you trade him, could you get that third rounder back? Maybe. And if the Rangers could do that, I would say go ahead and make that move right now. I've got no issue with that whatsoever because at that point, it's basically a wash. You give up a third rounder to get him, then you trade him and you get a third rounder back. Everything kind of works out in the end, right? But I don't know that they would get that. I mean, again, it feels like the NHL is always something of a seller's market. I mentioned the trade deadline last season, and maybe they could get a third rounder for him. All it would take is one team, right? All it would take is one team to pony up a third rounder, and then you can move on with your lives, and the whole thing is a wash, like I said. We'll see. It's also possible the Rangers might have to give him up for something significantly less than that. I don't think you'd have to attach a sweetener or anything like that to move on from him and his contract. But, I mean, you could get like a late round pick for Soucy, and it would be more of a salary dump than anything else. But you could trade Soucy for like a fifth rounder. I think that could happen. The only issue there is it's going to make Drury look quite foolish because, again, you give up a third rounder to bring in Soucy in a season where you don't even end up making the playoffs, and then you turn around the following offseason and you give him up for a fifth rounder. It's like, what was the point of that, right? But Drury seems to be in good with Dolan. That probably won't even be a blip on Dolan's radar, and everything will probably just move along as it would have anyway. Wouldn't look good on Drury, though, and I'm sure there's some Ranger fans that would certainly let him have it if there's a situation such as that. So, again, it comes down to me for as far as trading Soucy, do you need cap space, and can you get a decent return on him? We'll see what happens, but I think that's something the Rangers are certainly going to look to explore this offseason. Going to keep everything rolling in just a second. I want to shift our attention to K'Andre Miller and the possibility of him being offer sheeted this upcoming offseason here. We'll discuss that in just a second, and we'll tell you why I don't think it's as much of a concern as Will Cooley is. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by GameTime. There is nothing like playoff hockey. The energy, the rivalries, the nonstop action. With the Stanley Cup playoffs heating up, there has never been a better time to see it live, and GameTime makes getting in the building fast and affordable. GameTime gives you last-minute ticket deals, zone deals for deep discounts, panoramic seat views, and all-in pricing with no hidden fees. Plus, ticket prices often drop the closer you get to the puck dropping, so you can score big without overpaying. There's a lot of things to love about GameTime. You can save huge with zone deals. They pick the best seats at the lowest price. You can see your exact seat view before checkout, which will give you total confidence in your purchase. It's honestly a life hack for getting incredible tickets on the fly. Speaking of planning ahead, the NFL schedule was just released, and you better believe that a lot of us, myself included, are looking at the schedule and trying to pick out which games we would like to attend. You'll find great seats for as low as $100 for the NFL, thanks to exclusive discounts. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers. As always, I think we might do a mailbag episode in the next one. I want to look at some other offer sheet candidates from around the league. Would the Rangers try to offer sheet somebody? We're talking about Cooley getting offer sheeted, possibly even Miller. We're going to talk about him in just a second. But would the Rangers look to make their move on an RFA from around the league? We'll discuss that in a future episode. Also looking to do a mock draft where we all collectively put on our GM hats and make picks, as the GM of the New York Rangers. So looking forward to all that. But for right now, K'Andre Miller, could he be offer sheeted? And again, we did discuss Will Cooley in the episode before this one. So if you want to hear about that, certainly check out the episode before this one. Something else that I should mention here is that any player who gets offer sheeted does not have to sign the offer sheet. Like if they don't like the deal, they're not like obligated to it. I think that probably goes without saying, but I don't know that I ever specified that in the Will Cooley episode. So I'll do that right here and right now. Bottom line, if we're talking about Keandre Miller today, which we are, if a team were to offer sheet him, he would have to sign his name on the dotted line. Like, yeah, I like that deal, and I would take that if the Rangers do not match it. So that's kind of an important qualifier here. But as far as like Keandre Miller and where everything stands, you got to remember, he was said to be seeking a significant raise coming into this upcoming season. Now, how significant is significant? That's open for interpretation. But to kind of go for like a basis of comparison here, Miller is coming off of a 2-year contract that carried an annual cap hit of $3.872 million per season. So significant. I mean, to me, that sounds like up to about $5.5 million or so. Again, significant could mean different things to different people, but that's kind of like a ballpark of what I would be thinking. And Miller is now a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. He is also 2 years away from being a UFA for the first time in his career. So what I wanted to do, I'm going to bring up the same chart that I shared with you guys yesterday. And for anybody that might be on audio, don't worry about that. I will certainly talk you through it. We'll go ahead and bring this chart up right here and right now. There it is. So this is what you're looking at in terms of, offers that could be made to Keandre Miller. And as far as like trying to figure it out, again, for anybody on audio, there's 7 different levels here. Only a few of the price ranges are realistic for Keandre Miller. I think that the only 2 that you're going to see for Keandre Miller, the only 2 possibilities here on this chart are the 3rd least expensive out of the 7 and the 4th least expensive out of the 7. We'll start with the 3rd one. That would be for $2.34 million, between $2.34 million and $4.68 million per season. A team around the NHL can offer Keandre Miller a contract in that range. And if they were to do that, I would think it would actually be closer to the top of it because they're trying to price the Rangers out of Keandre Miller, right? So I think if there's a team that has a boatload of cap space, really likes Keandre Miller, you'd see them offer him right around $4.6 million per season. And if they were to do that, the Rangers would then have a week to match that offer. If the Rangers match the offer, Keandre Miller stays with the New York Rangers. If the Rangers do not match that offer, then the Rangers, Keandre Miller would leave, and the Rangers would be compensated with a 2nd-round draft pick. So the return isn't great. I mean, a 2nd-rounder is nothing to sneeze at, but when you think about these offer sheets, you're usually thinking about, teams ponying up the dough for whatever player that they're interested in, and then the team that has that player in the first place getting compensated with multiple draft picks. That wouldn't be the case here, and that level is a little bit dangerous for Keandre Miller and the Rangers. If the Rangers want to keep Keandre Miller, that is an area that gets a little bit tricky because I don't know if they want to go that high for Keandre Miller, $4.68 million per season, or what the case might be. I mean, we'll see how it shakes out. The only other level that I could see applying here to Keandre Miller is the level right above that one, which is an offer from another team between $4.68 million and $7.02 million. And I do think that if any team around the NHL were to offer Keandre Miller that money, you would see the Rangers allow Keandre Miller to walk. They would not match the offer. If it was over $4.68 million, if it was getting up toward the top of that chart there at $7.02 million per season, I don't think the Rangers are going that high. And the Rangers would opt to take the compensation instead. Miller walks, and the Rangers are compensated with a 1st-round pick and a 3rd-round pick. I don't know that anyone will go that high for Keandre Miller. I think the level below that one is the one that's the most likely. The level that's between $2.34 million and $4.68 million, wherein the Rangers would be given only a 2nd-round draft pick if Keandre Miller were to walk. But there's a lot to consider here. Again, I do think those are the only 2 levels that it could possibly end up being for Keandre Miller. The other possibility here that I think we certainly need to consider is the Rangers might decide to just be done with all of this and just, instead of dealing with the possibility of Miller, getting offer sheeted and then leaving because they can't match and the Rangers only getting a 2nd-round draft pick in exchange for Keandre Miller, you might see the Rangers instead just say, the heck with all that. Let's just trade K'Andre Miller before that can even happen. And that is a viable option the Rangers could look to explore. The Rangers do hand out their in-season extensions, right? Their in-season contract extensions. We have not seen one for K'Andre Miller, which indicates that at least one of two things has to be true. Either the Rangers and Miller are far away on what they think is a fair offer, or the Rangers are actually planning to move on from K'Andre Miller one way or another this offseason. And some of you might think I'm crazy for what I'm about to say here, but I do think you can get a first-round pick in exchange for K'Andre Miller this offseason. Forget about the offer sheet. I'm talking about just a trade. Straight up trade with somebody. You can probably make that happen. It goes back to what I was talking about in the Carson Soucy section. We saw players at the trade deadline this season just flying off the board. I mean, non-contending teams dealing away guys that are role players, guys that are, bottom sixers, guys that are half point per game players at best, and getting like second-round draft picks in exchange for them. Even defensemen. You saw, who is it? I think it might have been Dumoulin was traded at the deadline this season and got like a second-round draft pick. Anthony Beauvillier was another one that really stood out for me. He was on Pittsburgh. They dealt him. They got a second-round draft pick for Anthony Beauvillier. The Rangers, they got a second-round draft pick for Ryan Lindgren. And Miller, I would say, probably has at least more theoretical upside than Ryan Lindgren. His game might age a little bit better than Ryan Lindgren's as well. So, I mean, I think you get a first-rounder for him. And again, keep in mind, it might seem high. There's 31 other teams in this league. And I know the Rangers probably don't want to deal him within the division, and I understand that. But there's 31 other teams. All it takes is one. All it takes is one to give up a first-rounder. I think you can do that for K'Andre Miller. So I think I would look to go down that path. I don't want to take the risk of, first of all, I'm not really looking to extend K'Andre Miller in the first place. This is kind of where I'm at right now with him. But I'm also not looking to have that situation unfold, the one I described just a minute ago, where a team offer sheets him for around $4.68 million, and the Rangers can't match it, and they only get a second rounder for him, whereas they can get a first rounder if they trade him. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's kind of where things stand. And it's interesting. It's a similar situation as Will Cooley, but it's quite a bit different as well because, they both could be offer sheeted. Ranger fans have nightmares about the idea of Will Cooley no longer being here. I mean, he is like maybe the most universally liked player on the Rangers right now. It'd be really hard to find a Ranger fan that has a whole lot bad to say about Will Cooley and the way he started his NHL career. And with Miller, he has his fans. There's no doubt about it. And I don't think he's a lost cause either. He's still young. What is he, like 25? I just don't like the way he's regressed these last couple of seasons. It just hasn't been good. And I think if you can get a first rounder, in a situation where maybe you could use another first rounder. We know that the Penguins have one of the Rangers' 2 first rounders, either this year or next year. A couple of you guys pointed this out to me in a recent episode, something that I hadn't considered all that much. But if the Rangers are looking to contend next season, it would be nice to have an extra first rounder in your back pocket, right? That's some ammo for the trade deadline if the Rangers are in position to buy this upcoming trade deadline. They certainly weren't in that position this past deadline. But yeah, I don't know. To me, it just makes sense to move on from Miller via a trade before you end up losing him via an offer sheet for a second rounder, which isn't good enough. You could probably get more. And on top of that, like just the amount that you'd have to pay K'Andre Miller, I just don't know that it, first of all, that it's affordable, and second, that it would pay dividends in the long run. There's enough questionable contracts on this Ranger team right now, and that could end up being another one if you hang on to K'Andre Miller and if you do commit to him long term and give him a lot of money per season, that could end up backfiring. That's at least possible. In just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling. Going to shift our attention to a couple of unrestricted free agents. We're going to go through the entire list of Ranger free agents throughout the course of this offseason. We're going to be talking about a couple of lower level UFAs. We'll get to that in just a second. All right, going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers by talking a little bit about 2 impending UFAs for this New York Ranger team who both played extremely sparingly with the Rangers this past season. They are Nicolas Aube-Kubel and Louis Domingue. And the way this works, we've already talked about Calvin DeHaan. Anybody that might be new around here, every offseason we do this. Every UFA, every RFA, they get their own spotlight. We talk about them for as long as we need to. A bigger free agent like Will Cooley, we do a whole episode. For, guys that didn't play as much for the Rangers last season and aren't as important to the Ranger future. We kind of lump them together like this. But let's go ahead and kick things off here with Nicolas Aube-Kubel. It's funny. I got a confession here. I could not get it through my head this past season that Nicolas Aube-Kubel was on the Rangers. It just felt so random, and he didn't get talked about a whole lot, obviously. Like, anytime that he was actually mentioned or actually worked into the Ranger lineup for a game, I'd be like, huh, that's right. Yeah, Nicolas Aube-Kubel is indeed a member of the Rangers. I had a hard time remembering that. He only played 3 games, in fairness. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about a 29-year-old forward, former Stanley Cup champion in 2022 with the Avalanche, former second-round pick by the Flyers all the way back in 2014. The Rangers acquired him from the Buffalo Sabres last season in exchange for Eric Brandstrom. Brandstrom was actually acquired by the Rangers in the JT Miller deal, and then they turned around and obviously flipped Brandstrom to Buffalo in exchange for Aube-Kubel. And we didn't see much of Aube-Kubel at the NHL or AHL. With the Wolfpack, he played 3 games there, had 1 goal, also played 3 games with the Rangers, did not have any points in those games. As far as like the total package last season, more time in the AHL than the NHL for Aube-Kubel. Just 22 games in the NHL, and he only had 2 points. For his career, he has 80 points in 304 games. That's not terrible for somebody that gets limited ice time and is basically always in a bottom 6 role, and at this point, pretty much always a 4th liner. Those aren't awful offensive numbers, but they don't really jump out either. As far as like a prediction, I say he walks in free agency. The Rangers just don't really seem to have a place for him, and I've mentioned this before when it comes to like veterans. I don't want to see a situation next season where Nicolas Aube-Kubel is back and he's in the lineup and Brandon Hoffman is in the press box watching. No, thank you. I don't think that would happen under Sullivan, although I put nothing past these NHL coaches because we know how much they like to defer to their veterans from time to time. But I mean, look, 3 games with the Rangers, average .844, barely made a dent. The one reason why he could be back next season, and this is true whether we're talking about Nicolas Aube-Kubel or any of these like veteran journeyman type players that aren't going to command a whole lot of salary or a whole lot of length on their contract, is just that. I just gave it away. The very simple fact that re-signing Nicolas Aube-Kubel would cost you essentially nothing. You might be able to have him at the league minimum. His contract that just expired was for 1 year and $1.5 million. And as greedy as this is going to make me sound, I wouldn't even give him that. The Rangers need to save every penny they can at every situation. So if it comes down to, Nicolas Aube-Kubel has a $1.5 million offer from somewhere else for 1 year, let him walk. It's fine. They can find somebody at the league minimum and save every dime that they possibly can, moving forward, and probably get somebody that's right around on par with Nicolas Aube-Kubel anyway. So that's kind of where things stand there. Again, it's not a franchise-altering decision here whether to bring him back or not. We'll see. We'll see how it goes with Nicolas Aube-Kubel. The other UFA I wanted to talk about today was goalie Louis Domingue. Domingue now 33 years old, and his contract with the Rangers just expired. It was for 2 years at the league minimum of $775,000 per season. He's bounced around in the NHL, for quite some time. He's played with a handful of different teams. If you remember, he was actually Pittsburgh's starting goalie. I guess that would be 3 years ago in the playoffs, or 4 seasons ago at this point, since this one just ended, when the Rangers beat the Penguins in 7 games. He started a whole bunch of games in that series. I think the middle 5 games, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, obviously he's been with the Rangers, and we see him every once in a blue moon get called up. In the last 2 seasons, he's played 2 games with the Rangers, 1 in each season, 2-0 in that time, has stopped 50 of 53 shots in those 2 games combined. I always thought it was kind of weird that Domingue signed with the Rangers in the first place, just because when he signed, the Rangers obviously had Igor, and they had also just signed Jonathan Quick. And it's like, well, like, how do you think you're going to get onto this NHL roster? I mean, it's just not going to happen. And that still kind of is the situation now, because obviously Igor's going to be here and Quick just re-signed for 1 year. So for that reason, I would think Domingue would probably want to go somewhere else and try to find a team that, would at least give him a chance of making their roster. I don't think any team is going to look at him as like a franchise goalie at this point, but somebody might have a spot for him as a backup. That's at least possible. It's not going to be possible here with the Rangers. Now, if he wants to stick around, if he's happy, being on call for the Rangers, if they need a spot start at the NHL level and otherwise just playing for the Wolfpack, I mean, more power to him, and that's cool and everything. And if that's the case, I'd happily welcome him back. He's mostly played well with the Wolfpack when he's been here, although, last season was certainly better for Domingue than this season with the Wolfpack. But, you've got a veteran NHL goalie that, I pretty much just told you the whole story there. It's a veteran NHL goalie, and it's somebody that does have experience at the highest level. And it is somebody that, if you need a spot start, if anything happens to Igor or Quick, knock on wood, you can call this guy up. He can get into a game, whatever it might be. I'm completely fine. There's good organizational depth to be had with Louis Domingue. The one thing there, though, and I think some people will probably point this out, there might be some people yelling about this already, is that, if there's a situation next year where you have to start a goalie that is not named Igor Shesterkin or Jonathan Quick, I would like it to be Dylan Garand. Garand has been called up a couple of times by the Rangers, I think 3 times, but all 3 times it's been as a backup. He has not seen the ice, and he's really coming into his own with the Hartford Wolfpack. Garand and Domingue split time last season. Garand ended up having more games. He had 39 compared to 28 by Domingue, but Garand outplayed Domingue by every metric. And at a certain point, I think you want to let Garand make his debut, see what he can do. I wouldn't have even been opposed to Garand making a start at the very end of this past season, just because why not? The last 2 games were meaningless. And you might as well throw him out there and show what he can do. And the other thing, too, is that Garand at one time or another might eventually be trade bait for somebody. And I like Garand and I like him to stick around, but the Rangers have their franchise goalie in Igor Shesterkin, and there might be a team out there that looks at Garand and they look at the numbers that he's put up in the AHL, and they look at how well he's done in the playoffs in the AHL. He's got stellar playoff numbers and has played very well in the postseason. So that's a possibility as well, that the Rangers might eventually look to trade Garand. And if that is possible, maybe that makes it that much more likely they would like to hold on to Louis Domingue. But I think it really all comes down to what Louis Domingue would like to go for, moving forward here. If he's happy being in the AHL, bring him back. Why not? Organizational depth. If not, if he wants to go somewhere else and have a chance of making an AHL roster, I completely understand that. And hey, no hard feelings. It's been fun when he's been called up these last couple of years. We only saw him once this past season, once the year before that, but he played well in both games, and the Rangers played well around him. The one game I remember for sure was in MSG, and we got the Lou chance that we're picking up, throughout that game. So, yeah, we'll see what happens there. Again, not franchise altering, but we do like to give every impending Ranger free agent a fair trial on Locked On New York Rangers. But I figure we can call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at jchick17. Once again, at jchick17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.